less waste. Laura, we love her.
Being here in Brazil at COP30, I've had the opportunity to talk to Ed Milliband. He's the UK Government Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero. We had a conversation about the importance of being here, but also climate action back home. Ed, nice to see you. How has your COP been so far?
Tiring.
It's very, very
tiring,
true.
But invigorating, important. You meet amazing people like you.
Thank you.
And no, it's good. It's good. Like it's, you know, I sometimes think the people think the process is a bit mad, and it is. But how else are you going to get 193 countries to talk about and agree these incredibly profound and important things? And I think what's as important as what's happening in the negotiations, or if indeed more important, is all the action that's taking place outside the negotiations. The negotiations is like an anchor point for that, or an anchor for that. But you know, whether it's all the people like driving forward action. It's really, really inspiring.
Yeah, and that's both here, outside of the negotiations, and back home the rest of the calendar year. You are the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero. That net zero bit is not something that always sits well with people. And one of the big criticisms or concerns people have is about the cost. I'm wondering just how do you address that when people are saying this is costing too much, this feels like a financial burden, and people don't really see the mission?
I think a number of things. First of all, it's much more costly not to act. If we don't act, we're going to store up huge costs for future generations, and they will hold us in very, very low regard, because they'll say, you've dumped all this stuff onto us. That's what all of the experts say. Secondly, this is actually a way to reduce people's costs today, not increase them. If you think about having a solar panel on your rooftop, well, that can cut your energy bills. If you think about wind power, onshore wind power, for example, that's cheaper than gas. So this is an agenda about doing the right thing for future generations, but it's about a good agenda for today as well. And then the other thing is, if you think about good jobs, which really matters to people's standard of living, this is the route to good jobs of the future. 400,000 extra clean energy jobs on our plans by 2030. So for all these reasons, this is the right thing to do financially for people today.
Back home, people are concerned about climate change, but they're also quite concerned about the cost of living, about healthcare, about education. How are we integrating net zero into those issues, or are we? Is it a separate issue over here, or does it pull into these other key areas that we want to look at back home in the UK?
I think it's about better lives today, as well as doing the right thing for the generations of tomorrow. I've always felt that the environmental movement is about, it's not just about, in fact, it's not at all about like a hair shirt thing that says, well, we've got to make all these sacrifices just to make things better tomorrow. Let's make lives better for people today. You mentioned health. I think one of the things we don't talk about enough is air pollution. And, you know, fossil fuels causing air pollution, all of the implications that has. You know, the number of people who die prematurely from air pollution, both in the UK and around the world. You know, why don't we clean up our air? You know, that's a good thing to do. That's going to make for better lives, create more green spaces, better public transport, all of those things. So for me, it's about a vision of a better life for today's generations.
And when we think about that better future, one of the things that you hear around the corridors is this idea of a just transition. There's actually just transitions, because it's not just the energy sector. Yeah. But what does that just transition look like with all of these industries that have been built on the back of fossil fuels and practices that are not sustainable?
Well, take North Sea. We know we've lost 70,000 jobs in the North Sea in the last decade. So we know it's a declining basin. Now, we want to keep existing oil and gas fields open for their lifetime. We've said we won't issue new licenses to explore new oil and gas fields, because we think that's the right thing environmentally. But the key thing for the future for those workers is creating the jobs in carbon capture and storage, in hydrogen, in offshore wind, because our North Sea workers are brilliant. They've led the world, they've powered the world. Now they're going to carry on being oil and gas jobs, but we need also to create those other jobs for them to go into, those jobs that are sustainable for the very, very long term. You know, North Sea oil and gas with us for decades to come, but let's create that future as well. And that's, for me, what the just transition is about.
Ed, when you talk about this exciting net zero future with things like solar farms and wind turbines and pylons, a lot of people are not excited by that. I know I was. I grew up next to Whiteley Wind Farm, the UK's largest onshore wind farm, and it was a beautiful place to spend time. But a lot of people are concerned about the change to countryside. How would you address some of their concerns when we're pushing forward for this?
First of all, if you're worried about the countryside, the biggest threat to the countryside and biodiversity is the climate crisis. Secondly, we want communities to benefit from hosting that infrastructure. Community benefit is really important, but not just community benefit, community shares. We want to find ways in which communities can own that energy, so communities can see that benefit flowing to them. You know, in a sense, they're doing something for the country by hosting that energy infrastructure. The only other thing I'd say is I think there's a majority on our side. When you look at all the polling on this, there's definitely a vocal minority who are worried about this. And, you know, I don't want to sort of dismiss their concerns, but I think there's a big majority that says, well, hang on, we don't want to leave ourselves dependent on these fossil fuels. You know, controlled by petrostates and dictators. We saw the prices go through the roof when Russia invaded Ukraine. Let's have homegrown clean energy that we can rely on. And we do need to build that grid infrastructure, which is aging and hasn't been properly built.
It's really exciting that you have come into this role and put energy into net zero, but often we get stuck in these 4 or 5 year cycles where politicians or parties are putting forward these plans and then they might change. How are we addressing long-term climate change policies that need to be implemented when often we're stuck in these political cycles, not just here in the UK, but actually globally?
Well, look, one of the strong things we have in the UK is the Climate Change Act, passed in 2008 with cross-party support, which has that long-term view. Now, you'll know that the Conservatives and Reform now want to rip up the Climate Change Act. I think that's a great shame. There are lots of Conservatives who want to maintain it. I hope that as we have this debate, people will say, well, hang on a minute, we've got a tried and tested framework here, which has been copied by 60 countries around the world. Why would we rip up a framework that has been copied around the world, and a framework which business says is the thing that gives certainty for investment? So look, that's part of it. I think the other thing is, what inspires me about the future is young people. You know, in the end, this isn't, you know, political change doesn't just happen because politicians want it to happen, it's because of pressure. So if you're a young person watching this and thinking, well, what can I do? You know, I'm just one person, what can I do? Lord Deben, who used to head the Climate Change Committee, said this thing at an event I was at the other day. Go and see your MP. Just like one thing you can do, ask to go and see your MP. And I know as a member of Parliament, someone comes and sees me and says, I'm really concerned about this issue, I'm going to hold you to account for this issue. It does make a difference. And your MP won't be able to refuse to see you. I mean, I wouldn't refuse to see you. I hope your MP wouldn't. But, you know, so I think, you know, people holding politicians to account. And one other way I think about this is when people say, oh, we're going on too much about climate change. Are people going to be saying in 10 years' time that those people 10 years ago, they went on too much about climate change or too little? Well, they're going to be saying too little, aren't they? They're going to be saying, those people, well, they knew about all the risks. They knew they could do something about it. And that's the other thing. We can do something about this. You know, there's all the doom and gloom around. We're at the COP. 15 years ago, I left the COP in Copenhagen, which was pretty much a disaster. We were heading for 4 or 5 degrees of warming. Now it's 2.3, 2.5. Still not good enough, but it's progress. And that's because the world's moving. So, you know, you just look around here, solar power, wind power, countries moving, global south, global north. You shouldn't despair.
What does it mean for the UK to be a global leader on not just green economies, but things like climate finance? I'm here partly in my role as an ambassador for Tier Fund, who represent communities who are being devastated by climate change. So how are the UK prioritising other countries that are being impacted, and what does that leadership look like?
First of all, leadership looks like having an ambitious, what they call nationally determined contribution, NDC. That's our target for 2035, 81% in the UK. That's world leading, although Denmark has just beaten us with 82% this week.
We'll just have to give more.
I'm sure they deliberately did 82 so they could beat us by 1. The Danish representative said that to me. Doing our bit on climate finance is important. Obviously, finances are pressed at home, but that's, you know, that is important. And if you think about what the UK has done over the last 5 years and will continue to do, it is important. Also sharing our learning with countries across the world, you know, about what we've done, how we can help them, using the City of London as well. You know, it's so interesting being here because we're respected around the world for the contribution we make on these issues. It's not just about money, it's about technical expertise, know-how, what our officials do, what civil society does. So there's massive ways in which British leadership can make a difference.
Well, thank you, Ed, for having this conversation, and I look forward to continuing it back home, especially where it's just a little bit colder.
less waste. Laura, we love her.
He knows how to be the people's princess, which was one of the comments from yesterday. That was so funny.